Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special session of D-Talks or Disruptive Literacy Talks. I'm your host, Mashood. As all of us are aware, that at the very national level here in India, we have a new mission of Nipun Bharat, which talks about clearly defined goals and clearly defined timelines by which universal foundational literacy and numeracy has to be achieved in the school education system by 26-27. And to speak on how such a mission can be made successful, we have been bringing together speakers and experts who have built successful models, and through their practice and through the evidence that they have created, we have seen have really transformed the primary education system in different parts of the country, and especially have really helped turn around foundational literacy and numeracy statuses across India. And we are very honored to be joined by one such organization, the Madhi Foundation, which is an education not-for-profit organization. And presently it is leading in collaboration with the Tamil Nadu state government. It is the chief management partner of the Tamil Nadu state FLN mission as well. And it aims to make universal in Tamil Nadu to make sure that all children are able to achieve the foundational literacy and numeracy skills within the next 5 years. To speak on Madhi Foundation's work, we are joined today by the founder and CEO of Madhi Foundation. She has over a decade of experience, has been a leader in the education sector, and has been associated with various organizations such as Teach for India, as well as with universities such as the London School of Economics and the University of Oxford. Ms. Murlia Shaukat is our guest for today. Murlia, it's an absolute honor to have you here. Thank you so much, and we are really looking forward to your presentation today.
Thank you, Mashood. Absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you so much for having me. And congratulations on completing, I believe, 100 episodes of D-Talks, or having 100 guests on your webinar. So congratulations. And I would also like to wish all the viewers in India a very happy Ganesh Chaturthi. Everybody's celebrating Ganesh Chaturthi in the country today. So wishing everyone peace, prosperity, and hopefully the year ahead is a much safer and happier one for all of us. That said, thank you for the introduction, Mashood. So I have a brief presentation to discuss what Madhi does with respect to foundational learning in Tamil Nadu. And if you'll allow me, I'll share my screen and get started. Just give me one. Is my screen visible? No. Okay.
Not yet. Well, yeah. Now
it is. Now? Okay. Great.
Yes. Now we can see your screen. Here we would also request all those who are joining us live. If you have any questions or any thoughts, please do share it with us on chat as well, and we'll try and bring them up during our discussion towards the end. So yeah, Murlia, the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Mashood. So we generally try and demystify the problem of foundational learning with a very simple but very relatable sort of a graphic. And this is in front of you. This is a bucket with multiple holes. So when we talk about things like, the foundational learning crisis, primary quality of primary education being, less than aspirational. I think these are jargons, or these are things that people outside of the education, sort of the academic side of education problem solving, do not relate to, right? So I think the first thing that we try and do is to demystify it, to say that the problem of poor quality of education is not something that you can look at in silos. I think we're very we sort of we're very quick to make teachers the villain of this problem, right? And we do it consciously or subconsciously, and we're trying to say that that is certainly not the case, because the problem is a leaky bucket with multiple holes, with each one of these holes sort of representing one problem that continues to make the bucket leak. So you have right from curriculum to teacher training to administration to governance structures, to teacher coaching, to ensuring level appropriate assessments. All of these are holes that one needs to plug, and plugging one or two of these holes at a time will still mean that the bucket continues to leak. And therefore, we say that the foundational learning crisis is a complex problem and one that cannot be solved in silos. And therefore, we're saying that we need a holistic set of solutions to address it, so that all of these holes are actually plugged more or less at the same time, right? So now that we've tried and simplified or de-jargonized the problem, I'll go right into what we do at Madi. So our work is primarily in Tamil Nadu at the moment, though we do have a formal association with the government of Telangana as well, but that's sort of just evolving. So I'll speak primarily about our work in Tamil Nadu at the moment. And what we do essentially is, to design and implement large-scale interventions to improve foundational literacy and numeracy among children of grades 1 to 3. The reason we say it's large-scale intervention is the approach to solving a problem such as foundational learning at a systems level it requires a slightly different approach. And of course, strategy versus doing it at just a school level, right? And therefore the stress on saying that we design for scale. We are the chief management partners for the Tamil Nadu Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Mission, which was incidentally recently named as Ennum Eruthum. So Ennum being numbers and Eruthum being letters, and it's drawn from a very popular and very sort of inspirational quote from Tamil literature. So the mission in Ennum Eruthum is Tamil Nadu's foundational learning mission, and Madi's been appointed as the chief management partner. Now, what does that mean? It essentially means that we take our approach, which we have tried and tested over the last 5 years across 2,000 schools, working with about 60,000 students, to now making it sort of the kind of the approach that the state will adopt and implement. What each of these 60 stands for, I shall get to now. So we believe, like I said, the foundational learning crisis cannot be solved by just addressing one or two components that affect the delivery of education in schools, and it needs to look at both the supply side of education as well as the demand side of education. Supplier of education here being the government, and the demander of education here being the community and the parent community, right? So therefore, we've come up with this with sort of a representation of a puzzle to indicate that you need each of these puzzle pieces to come together in order to complete the puzzle of the foundational learning mission. And again, to simplify it and for easier recall, we're calling it the 6T. Now, the first T stands for teaching learning materials and all the sort of learning collaterals and manipulatives that go into the classroom. And children that age, it's sort of, I would say, criminal to limit the TLMs to just the textbooks, which is invariably the case, right? I mean, in a typical classroom, in a typical public school classroom, an under-resourced public school classroom, there is very little learning material beyond the textbook, and I think we're trying to change that. So we're advocating for the inclusion of multi-dimensional kind of set of materials, workbooks, learning kits, storybooks, teacher manuals that the teachers would use, activity materials that children can use in groups. So really making it a resource-rich environment for children in a classroom. So that's the first T, teaching learning material. The second is training, and we also believe that the training, the approach to training for foundational learning needs to cater to the context. And the context is that in India, a vast majority of our classrooms are multi-grade and multi-age and multi-level. Some are even multilingual, which means there is one teacher, 3 grades, 2 mediums of instruction, and that's what a teacher has to grapple with, right? And therefore, for a teacher to be able to navigate that complexity requires a very different approach to training versus if you were to speak to or rather train a group of teachers that are responsible for 1 grade, more or less homogeneous levels of learning, etc. And we're also talking about scale. We're talking about 2 lakh teachers who need to receive, sort of a uniform and standardized quality of training, and that is a challenge when you think about how many levels of cascade a training goes through for it to eventually reach the teacher. So for those who may be slightly unfamiliar with how training happens in a large system like a government education system, first you train master trainers at the state level, then they would train trainers at the district level, then block, then possibly zone, and then the teacher. And the transmission loss that happens in this case is immense, right? And therefore you need to account for that. And I believe that we're in many ways a great time to innovate for this problem and solve for this problem with the use of technology, which was not even possible maybe 5 years earlier, right? So I'll come to it in a bit and how we can use technology to, how we use technology to solve for this transmission loss problem. The third is tracking, and you often see that in terms of what we call tracking here is the gamut of activities around teacher support. In a system, you typically have your block resource trainers who visit schools and act as teacher coaches. You also have other officials who come into classrooms and collect a lot of data. But it comes down to not how much data you collect. I think as a system, we are great at collecting, copious amounts of data and having millions or billions of data points at our disposal. But it comes down to, what is the quality of data that you collect, and how do you use that data? How easily accessible is that data? How, again, simplified is that data? Because remember that this data needs to be useful for a teacher, for a school school leader or a principal, for a block resource trainer to be able to loop those data points back into improving teaching and improving outcomes in a classroom, right? So tracking is where we build sophisticated, data systems that are sophisticated in the back end, but in the front end, give you just as much information and as much relevant, timely information as you need to be able to loop that back into your teaching or teacher support practices to improve outcomes. The fourth T is tutoring at home, which is where we talk about the community or the parental involvement aspect of things. And we believe that for far too long, we've completely divorced parents out of this problem and say that this is a problem that the school system needs to solve entirely. And I think that needs to change. At that age, first of all, at a very formative age, having some support structures at home and supporting routines at home helps, even if we believe that our children come from homes where parents' education levels, may not be able to support children's learning. There is a lot that can be done to help parents demand better from the system and support children at home. And therefore, tutoring at home is entirely the parent-facing interventions that we deliver. And the fifth T is targeted communication. I think for any movement or any mission to be successful, there needs to be cohesion in the communication, in the messaging that goes out from the system. For example, I could cite, say, a Swachh Bharat mission, that it was, there was a certain communication that was delivered for the general public, delivered to the bureaucracy, to the political leaders, but it was the end goal was to get everybody to rally around this idea of sanitation and hygiene, right? And therefore it's very, very important, especially if we're saying that we're going to deliver something on a mission mode, that we design and deliver communication, effective communication, so that there is awareness, but also a sense of urgency and a sense of ownership across different stakeholders towards that mission. And the last T is actually, sort of a cross-cutting theme, which is technology, because that we believe holds all the other 5 T's together. And I know this is sort of an extremely unpopular opinion at the moment, given the wave that EdTech is riding, but we don't believe that technology is the answer to all our problems at the moment, but it can be a huge enabler, especially when we're talking at solving for something at scale. So therefore, we don't call it EdTech, we actually call it tech for ed systems, because what we're building is, EdTech conjures up an image of, a child on a tablet going through a personalized learning management system. And what we're saying is building technology for education systems, which requires a much broader, a much larger sort of vision on how technology can be leveraged to improve or to bring about systemic reform. So that's the 6T coming together and forming that sort of a complete puzzle. Now, we often get asked, this is great, but what exactly do you do at Madhi, for each one of these? Because it looks like, these things is something that, it's sort of confounding for some people as to how do we then take this to the state, and how does this become the foundational learning mission? So I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes on that. So with respect to TLM, what we actually do is work with the state SCRT, or the State Council for Educational Research and Training, right from the time the curricular framework is developed to the time all the teaching learning materials are designed and delivered to the classroom. So there is enormous amount of research that we take to these workshops, so you create a state resource group that is in charge of doing this, and Madhi is a part of that state resource group that's bringing in our expertise and our work in the field and our learnings from the work that we've done in the field, and then we collaborate with the SART to design and deliver the final set of TLM. So there's a huge amount of collaboration that happens. So it is not that we have our own set of books and we walk up to this SART and say, we have it, please take it and use it, and please make this the state's approach. So there isn't a force fitting of anything that we've done in the past, except for the learnings that we've garnered. And every step of the way there is collaboration and there is support, with a deliberate intention of making this the state-owned mission, right? It is not Madhi's mission. Madhi is a partner, but the ownership comes from the state, and therefore, without having them lead the design process, it's always going to be seen as something an NGO came and recommended and implemented. So the TLM process is TLM development process is what I just explained. Similarly, for training, again, there is a training state resource group that looks at the materials that have been developed, and then making sure that there is no dissonance between what the materials require the teachers to do versus what happens in the training. And that is a problem that is being solved, because generally the problem is that there is something in your textbook and then your training expects something else out of you. And here is where we've infused technology, where we've supported the state to build a lot of online content that can be used by teachers asynchronously, on their mobile phones, online courses that they can use. But it almost is a flipped classroom model where they do consume content online, but physical training spaces exist, and they're used to sort of again come together as a group, share learnings from the courses you've completed, demonstrate what you have learned, and use that space more for facilitation rather than actual delivery of training, because that happens online. And again, here the collaboration is that we sit and we create these the syllabus for training, the content for training, storyboarding for all the online courses. We're involved in the production of these courses as well. So again, heavily collaborating with the state on the training aspect as well. Tracking is I think something that we're incredibly proud of, because we've been able to introduce a lot of innovation when it comes to tracking. So earlier, what happened in a typical classroom is, as a BRT, a block resource trainer, or if somebody as an external going into a classroom, you would have a piece of paper, you would make notes on that form, you would go back to your office and fill it in on an Excel sheet, and sort of sometimes, or more often than not, that data sort of disappeared into a black hole. Now what we've done is we've built applications for the state, applications and dashboards for the state, and put a lot of thought into what goes into these applications in terms of the kind of data points that you even want to collect. Do there's no end to the amount of data that you can collect, but a lot of thought has gone into the data points that we want to collect and how that will actually influence teaching and learning in a classroom. So there are applications that a teacher coach would use. The dashboard will tell you exactly how the teacher has been improving, what the teacher has not been improving on, etc., etc. And the teacher has their own dashboard, the coach has their own dashboard, the principal secretary, up to the principal secretary, has a dashboard, and everybody sort of understands what is going on inside the classrooms within their jurisdiction. As a district collector, I would know that in my district there are these many children who still cannot read, or still cannot do addition. So it gives you a bird's eye view of the status of learning in your sort of jurisdiction. And this is something that, again, we've collaborated with the state to build. Tutoring at home now has actually taken precedence over everything else because of COVID, and we continue to build, test, pilot a lot of home learning programs, both for children with and without digital access, to really understand what is most effective, what is most equitable, and we will continue to do this even after schools reopen, because we believe that the sort of connection between the school and the home needs to get stronger. And the last is, of course, targeted communication, and this is something that the state has taken a lot of ownership over. In fact, in the recent assembly session, the Honorable Finance Minister announced that the Ennumeratum mission, which is the foundational learning mission, will be a state priority for the next 3 to 5 years, which means that in terms of the messaging, it's clear, it's consistent, and it requires everybody to rally around it. So we will continue to work on this. So there will be a strategic communication approach to foundational learning, and how we keep reminding the system about the importance and what needs to be done at different intervals. And of course, technology. Like I said, it is what holds the other 5 Ts together. It is not the panacea, but I think without technology, being able to ensure or being able to amplify impact at scale would certainly be a challenge. And I think it's a great time for technology to play a pivotal role in system reform at the moment. So just wanted to end with the with the news that the state is taking the bull by the horns in a sense, and saying that they will prioritize, the state will prioritize foundational learning over the next 5 years, and put its weight behind it. And we're grateful to have a chance to play a role in this mission, and be a part of it at a very, very important time, because I think we realize that the next 5 years are going to be very critical for us to move the needle on foundational learning. So I just want to end on what we hold very true, very close to our hearts, which is that it is not everything. People ask us that, foundational learning, why is there so much obsession around it? Is there not, there's so much more to do? And we say, yes, absolutely. But ensuring access to meaningful primary education, we believe, is the least that we can do. It's certainly not everything that we can do for our children, but it's the least we can do. But the first thing that we must do for every child. And I would end this on that note, and thank you so much for your patient hearing, Mashood, and everybody else who's joined us live. I will stop sharing my screen, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Maulya, for sharing with us, the phenomenal work which Madhi Foundation is doing.
Is my screen still being shared, Mashood?
Yes, it's off the stream now.
It's off. So my screen's not shared. Okay, great. Yes.
Yeah. So thanks once again for sharing the work which is being done by Madhi. And it's one thing which was very remarkable was how how a very holistic view about the problem of FLN is at the very center of Madhi's work, and it is something which definitely other organizations and other practitioners working in FLN will also benefit from. That we are, because we see many stakeholders working on specific parts of the puzzle, but you've kind of brought them together. So that's truly remarkable, and thanks for sharing this. I wanted to start by from the very last slide where you mentioned about the government of Tamil Nadu taking the FLN mission as a major priority of the government, and that itself is remarkable, and truly one can imagine the amount of work and advocacy which might have gone to reach this stage. Would you like to maybe start by sharing a bit more about what is unique about Tamil Nadu? We see the Nipun Bharat mission being launched as late as 2021, but do you feel that this journey or the struggle of making FLN a government priority, what goes beyond that? If you'd like to share about that.
Sure. I think the first thing is, if I were, most people that I speak to about Tamil Nadu and the fact that we work on education in Tamil Nadu, the first reaction is why? I mean, Tamil Nadu's at the forefront of, your human development indices and, your different parameters. And we often have this struggle to educate almost people about the fact that educational outcomes in Tamil Nadu have been on the decline over the last 10 years. And to give you the most latest data, the PGI that came out a few months ago placed Tamil Nadu, when it came to outcomes, at the 23rd rank out of 32. Which is significantly behind a lot of other states like even Bihar, Jharkhand, and typically states that you would associate with low learning outcomes, and we're sort of one rank above a large state like Uttar Pradesh. So it has jolted the system into acknowledging that this is a problem. And they've seen it coming. They've seen it coming over the years. And it would be entirely dishonest of me to say that, Madhi has been the only one advocating for it, because, as you know, there have been several organizations that have been talking about foundational learning in India for years together, and it's finally getting heard. So I think it's also. I would also say, any systems change is about political will. So I do believe that there is political will right now to acknowledge that a problem exists and to do something about it. So I would say a lot of it is about stars aligning and people taking, data seriously.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Malia. And here, when we talk about a major challenge, you didn't mention that there has been a recognition of foundational learning being a problem for many years now, but now we are seeing more traction with the top levels of the government taking cognizance of this. When we talk about achieving universal foundational literacy and numeracy, goals for all the children, and we see that the pandemic has kind of set us many years back with respect to these goals. Generally, there are two approaches which are often advocated. One is of making incremental changes in the current education system versus a complete overhaul, or a complete overhaul of the system to create a transformational change in the current system. With respect to foundational literacy and numeracy, what would your thoughts be on this?
So, what I just shared, right? Systems change is often, it's invariably dependent on political will, right? And it comes down to the sort of appetite for risk of the political dispensation to say, or it's not just about foundational learning, right? Any sort of systems change, any domain, any sector, um, it is about it is about saying how urgent is it and how politically salient is it for us to solve it. And I think foundational learning in that sense right now seems like a very urgent problem to solve, and therefore the probability of adopting a more transformational approach to change is higher at this point. But I think there are pros and cons to both, in taking the incremental change route versus the transformational change route. I think transformational change tends to shock the system, tends to sort of upset the equilibrium in the short term, but in the long term, you have a new system that's more efficient, more effective, etc. But it requires, like I said, a great appetite for risk in the short term by the system. Incremental change, on the other hand, like you said, you would imagine, is slow, doesn't shake the system up too much. It doesn't. Some of the consequences are less shocking to the system. But again, if we don't have time, which we don't, I think at the moment, then it doesn't make sense to say that we will change slowly. That said, I do believe that even within foundational learning, or even within a change, a mission that aims to change status quo, there can be certain components that you can change in a transformative way, in a drastic way, and there are certain components and aspects that you can say, that's the next battle to fight, and therefore we'll be slow about it. For example, I do believe that at the moment, curricular design and designing for the context that we're in, especially post-pandemic, making sure that our learning material meets the child at their level and not just is blind to their learning needs. That requires transformational change, and that requires us to be more drastic about and more deliberate about how we're designing it. There are other aspects to the foundational mission that have been recommended, like teacher accountability and teacher incentives, teacher penalties, etc. And I think that has the potential to shock the system if it is introduced too quickly and too soon, right? And therefore, you need to ensure that all the peripheral factors and the peripheral, enablers for teachers needs to be in place before you start expecting change at that level. So I do believe that incremental change and transformational change can sort of go hand in hand in different aspects of the mission, and I think we're already seeing that happening. We're sort of seeing that happening. But overall, I do believe that the climate is about bringing about a huge transformation in the way we look at foundational learning.
Right. That's a very, I would say, unique perspective, because what many of our other speakers have either, they've either chosen incremental or transformation. But what you said is truly important, that it is something, that we have to look at the context, and we have to look at what is the specific levers, or what are those specific nuts and bolts in the system that we are trying to change. Because they are of a different nature and might require a different, nature of change as well. So thanks for sharing that thought on that. Another aspect which you did mention in your talk was about, like the different challenges which teachers face, multi-grade, multilingual. These are certain challenges which are faced by, especially by the early grade teachers who are teaching math and language. You also talked about addressing the teacher capacity building needs of teachers in Tamil Nadu as well, and you talked about the online capacity building programs, the courses, and the sharing opportunities which you create for teachers. What has been the experience of Madhi Foundation with respect to mindsets, existing mindsets of teachers with respect to pedagogies? Did you feel that they are teachers? Is there pre-service teacher training, for example, kind of preparing them to face such challenges in the classroom? And what challenges did you face with respect to addressing, or kind of when we are talking about new pedagogies, innovative pedagogies inside the classroom? How did you deal with the existing mindsets of teachers? They themselves have been a product of an education system where often the approaches were very traditional. Your thoughts, please.
So we haven't worked much on pre-service training, and in a state like Tamil Nadu, there hasn't been a lot of teacher recruitment in the past 10 years. So we're talking about teachers who've had pre-service training 10 years ago, where the dynamics, were very different, right? And therefore, I don't think that's a topic I can comment on in depth. But what we have seen with respect to in-service training, with respect, especially primary teachers, is that there's a heavy dissonance between what happens in the training and what happens when somebody walks into a classroom. So if you are trained, first of all, I think to begin with, the training so far has not even acknowledged in many spaces, that not acknowledge the existence of the problem of multi-grade teaching, right? And how you would train a teacher to manage a multi-grade class is very different from is very different from how you would train a teacher to manage a monograde class. And I think that acknowledgement itself has affected the quality of training to a great degree. And now we're seeing that change slowly. The second is, like I said, there's a dissonance between what happens in the training and what is expected of the teacher in a classroom. And unless the two tracks run in parallel, teachers are going to continue to feel that training is a complete waste of their time, and you cannot blame them for it, right? If you are training a teacher on saying that on something as important as differentiated instruction, and you're in your training, you're saying don't expect that the child to adapt to the textbook, allow the textbook to adapt to the child, and you still walk into a classroom, you pull up a random child who's way behind grade level, you give them a grade level textbook and say read, and if the child doesn't read, you hold the teachers by the scruff of her neck and say that why is the child not reading. The teacher is going to resort to rote teaching to say that whether the child understands something or not, a child should be able to read from a textbook when a officer walks in and thrusts the textbook in the child's hand, right? So therefore, the dissonance between training and classroom visits needs to change for training to start making sense for teachers. And I think the mindset shift will happen only then when the teacher believes that the training that she attends today is something she can take back into her classroom the very next day, right? And if the training is not contextual, if you're talking to me about how the teacher can implement something that is completely not relevant for her classroom and needs to be done because it's the cool thing to be discussed, it's a cool topic that everybody's doing in teacher training, then they're going to find it a complete waste of their time. So there are also teachers on different spectrum of learning, right? Just like how children are on different spectrum of learning, and just as we keep harping on differentiated teaching for children, I think we need to start putting systems in place for differentiated training for teachers. Not all teachers need to be present at all training sessions. They may be masters in some topics and they may be struggling in others. And therefore, that is where your data systems come into place to say that this teacher's class is struggling with these topics, and therefore this teacher needs reinforcement in terms of training on those topics. And that's what we're trying to build. So I think contextual, relevant, practicum based training is the need of the hour. And if we can fix that, then it's fair for us to say that, teachers are not motivated, they don't take training. When your training system itself is broken, I think it's a bit unfair to blame teachers for not being interested.
Yeah. You mentioned about data as well, and how data has been one very important part of the puzzle of the 6T model. And you also talked about how real-time tracking and corrective action is also very crucial, right? Because it is something which requires the whole system to be very reflexive and quickly adapt to fill the gaps as well. And when we look at the national mission, also the Nipun mission, also it talks about these clearly defined outcomes and timelines, etc. So a lot of I sense as in a mission there are going to be a lot of targets, a lot of specific timelines within which those targets have to be met in terms of learning outcomes, etc. What would your thoughts be on how do we ensure accountability at all levels? You did mention about the Tamil Nadu government also using this particular app in which the data flows all the way from the child, from the class level all the way up to the district magistrate. What would your sense be that what are the current systems of accountability in place, and where does reform need to happen in with respect to accountability if we really want to achieve these goals of universal foundational literacy and numeracy?
I think setting targets is very important for any endeavor, for that matter. And I think the national mission has in that sense done something that is truly transformational in saying that we will chase targets for learning. But I do believe that in the spirit of decentralization, the state must be allowed to set its own targets, and I think that is also fairly clearly defined in the national mission. But even at the state level, I believe that when we talk about targets and timelines, there needs to be consensus, there needs to be clarity, and there needs to be consistency in the messaging across those targets. I'm trying to think of an analogy where teachers today are very confused about what is expected of them. If you are expecting a child, for a teacher to say that my child can read, then if a child can read 4 words in a minute, is that reading fluency? Can the teacher believe that is to be regarded as fluency? Or is there something more to it, right? And I think a large percentage of teachers will benefit from being familiar with these very clear targets as to if there is, a metric around words per minute that defines fluency for children. Very specific set of operations that children should be able to do by grades 1, 2, and 3. I think just clarity around the targets is something that is very critical. And I have this analogy that I often quote, that it's all right for you to say that that there is a destination that teachers need to reach, and probably we leave it to the teachers to decide how to get to that destination. So you need not be rigid about pedagogy, saying that you need to adopt these pedagogic processes only to reach there, but at least give them the destination very clearly in order for them to get there. And therefore, I think communication around those targets is very important. Clarity is important, and consistency is important. Allow teachers to, it takes time for a system to adopt or to internalize new sets of rules and new sets of targets, right? So if we keep changing the goalposts every year, then it's going to confuse and upset the system. And therefore, I think we need to be consistent in the targets that we consistent in the communication about the targets that we set, and everybody from the principal secretary to the teacher needs to be aware of these targets and needs to be able to know that this is what we will rally around. And I think that's missing today, right? And for one officer walking in and getting the child to read is the target. Another officer walking in and getting a first standard child to write a sentence, which the child is not required to do, right? At grade 1, you're not required to be able to write a sentence, but for that officer, getting the child to write a sentence is the target. So I think standardizing communication around what to expect from a grade 1 child, grade 2 child, grade 3 child needs to happen, and that the system is held responsible and accountable only for those targets. That is what we're hoping to achieve, and I think the app does that quite effectively, because it only allows you to assess or test for very specific competencies, and given that every child is going to be assessed for his or her level, you get to see the child's growth, individual growth, rather than to say that there is an absolute target and every child needs to be there at the end of it. So you do look at an individual's child's trajectory, but also have an overall view of how the system is doing at a macro level as well. So that's the kind of agility that the app allows for.
Right. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on this. I wanted to kind of also know your thoughts on, you talked about, data collection and accountability, and now, with the pandemic and with this kind of disrupted kind of scenario, and this uncertainty over schools reopening, then they might close again, hybrid learning, etc. So what do you feel needs to be the focus of with respect to foundational literacy and numeracy? What would be like the most important goals that we need to gear ourselves with till this period of uncertainty remains? And here, with respect to assessments, like in pre-pandemic times, we had an academic calendar, so there was kind of more clarity and stability that, okay, this is when we'll take the assessments, this is what we'll do with that information. What do you feel, and what is Madhi Foundation stand on? What exactly should assessments be taken for, and what should be the method of the assessments, and then the data kind of how to take corrective action based on assessments? Your thoughts, please.
So, I mean, I think we're talking about very young children here, and with or without the pandemic, I think we ought to allow children time to come into schools and give them time to settle down. So I don't believe that just because there is a pandemic and when schools reopen, of course, there is an added impact of the trauma that some of the children may have gone through because of the pandemic. But at the end of the day, I think we need to be sensitive about the fact that these are very, very young children that we're talking about. And therefore, allowing time to settle down needs to happen regardless. And therefore, assessments in that sense we need to be creative about the kind of assessments that that we will be administering, and there's a lot that can be done without it making seem like assessments. I'm not saying assessments are not important. I think it's very important to have children come back into schools and for us to be able to group them into the different levels that they'd be at, because you're going to have a child in grade 3 who's barely attended grade 1, and you are going to have children in grades 1 and 2 who've never set foot inside a school. So in that sense, it's may not have set foot inside a school, but maybe they are at different levels, and therefore force fitting them into just an age-based group or a grade-based group may not make sense, and therefore to be able to group them according to ability levels, differentiated ability levels, you will have to, I think, conduct a baseline, which is the plan, and once that happens, and how the baseline is conducted, like I said, can be very creative. Play can provide enough and more opportunities for you to assess where a child is at. It doesn't have to be pen and paper alone, and especially for that age, you probably have more insights from being creative about your assessments versus just a pen and paper test. We advocate for that age a one-on-one assessment as much as possible between the teacher and the student. It is more time consuming and a little more exhausting for the teacher to do it. But I do believe that we'll be hugely misled if we only rely on pen and paper with this age group, especially as soon as they come into school, because the kind of intimidation and the lack of familiarity is going to sort of increase their resistance and their ability to think and perform, and we'd probably not be able to assess very effectively. So we are advocating for as much one-on-one assessment as possible on very on a small set of skills, so it's not a very exhausting process for the teacher either, but enough set of critical indicators for the teacher to know how to group children. So I do believe that it requires us to be creative and innovative for this age group, and there's a lot more that a teacher will be able to discern out of a one-on-one assessment than a group assessment that is just on pen and paper. And that's what we have advocated, and I do believe that that is what will happen as part of the mission once schools reopen.
Right, and you also talked about a younger age group where we have to kind of kind of have a different approach. We are also now there's strong evidence which is kind of coming out that even children beyond grade 3, in the elementary stage up to upper primary, many of them are kind of losing on certain skills as well. So I wanted to know your thoughts on that with respect to what approaches are being thought of, specifically if we look at with respect to FLN missions. And also if you could share your thoughts on how the corrective actions, how the prep, you talked about the app, which is essentially giving data at all levels, and then there is certain corrective action. Who would be responsible for taking those corrective actions, and what would be like you said that you have an inspector saying and randomly going to children saying, okay, read this book, and then kind of scolding the teacher there. But
Mashood, I may have lost you. Mashood, are you still there? Hello? Yeah, I think you're back.
Yes. Should I repeat my question?
Yes, please. I lost you towards the end.
Yes. Sorry. My question was with respect to children who are beyond the foundational stages as well, or what approaches would be suitable or are being planned with respect to their filling their gaps. I mean, of course, considering that they also have been under a lot of socio-emotional trauma as well. And the second question, with more respect to when we are collecting data, what would be some success stories which you say where corrective action has been made possible? How do we empower teachers, administrators, the middle level managers to actually take that corrective action? Your thoughts, please.
So to your first question, I think given how common the problem is of children being behind grade levels with respect to their language and critical numeracy skills, I think there is merit in doing a sort of a baseline almost every year at the beginning of every academic year for every child, and ensuring that there is some sort of a bridging program that happens alongside your regular, there is always going to be pressure of conforming to a textbook, right? It's beyond a certain grade. It's not practical for to suggest that children always be grouped for every subject based on ability levels. That's just not how the system is built, and I think that's just how it is. It is the reality of the system that we are working with. But while that happens, I do believe that there is now space for us to um, uh, run bridge courses, especially now that we know that even grades beyond grade 3 are going to come with having experienced significant learning losses. At least for the next 2 or 3 years, there needs to be a similar approach where there is baselining at the beginning of every year, and there is a bridging program over and above your regular classes that happen. And I do believe that Tamil Nadu is intending to do that, because there is certainly an acknowledgement that the learning loss is not reserved or restricted only to the foundational learning classes. It's not just 1, 2, 3. Children in grades 4, 5, 6, 7 are all going to come back to school with having lost out on several competencies and abilities and skills. To your second question about, I think, accountability, it has to be a multi-layered approach. It cannot be just the BRT walking into a classroom and collecting data, and that the buck stops at the level of the BRT, which is why we have a system of a multi-level review mechanism, where there will be on a quarterly basis reviews at the district level, where you have your state level officials holding your district heads accountable. You then have your are you still there, Mashood? I don't know if you're having trouble.
Yeah, Malia, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me? May I continue? Not sure if I'm still audible. Would you want to turn your video off in order to conserve bandwidth? Will that help? Is this better?
Yeah. Yes, yes, Malia. Yes, I can hear you. Please.
Okay, great. So, so you have your state level officials holding your district level officials accountable, and then sort of that accountability mechanism cascades down to the school level. And I think it's data integrity is a pervasive problem in our system, right? I mean, you know that most data coming out of the out of government systems is it's not entirely reliable. So I think the first battle that we need to fight is to be able to ensure reliability of the data that is being collected, and therefore we've designed some algorithms that will sort of point to data being slightly off the mark. So cleaning up data and getting the system to report credible data is actually the first battle, not even to see things improving, not even to see outcomes improving, right? And I think we've been so incentivized to report good data that we will never know whether the problem exists in the first place. So I think the first step would be to not scare the system or shock the system, which is why I say that transformational change is not probably the only approach all the time. So in this case, we're not going to start holding teachers or holding the system responsible in the first year to say that why aren't children getting better. right? Because that's only going to again incentivize misreporting. So the first few cycles would simply be to clean the data up, and like I said, there are systems and algorithms to do that, and eventually get to a point of, you know, how are districts doing, how are blocks doing, how are zones doing, and of course how are schools doing. So therefore the responsibility is devolved. It does not lie with one or two officers, but what the app and the dashboard does is gives a sort of a holistic picture based on different data points collected by different officials, and sort of brings it together and synthesizes it to, you know, to present it in a very simple and easy to consume way. So yeah, so that's basically the system that we're hoping. Again, we've piloted it in a small scale in about 2 districts, and we'll hopefully see what comes out of it when it goes live across the state.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Malia, in conclusion, we saw in your presentation about this very kind of inspiring community engagement and parent engagement aspect of your program, and this is also something which I think there's recognition now at the very top policy levels that parents need to be involved, the community needs to be involved, and no longer is a belief that schools will, teachers alone will be able to help us eradicate the problem of FLN, is something which people are now coming to terms with. What is Madhi Foundation's long-term vision with respect to parent engagement, community engagement in the in the learning of the child at the foundation level? And do you feel that this to make this vision sustainable, government policy, what policy gaps need to be addressed, and what support will be required from the government to kind of solidify this kind of a vision? Your thoughts, please.
Yes, so I think again there is acknowledgement right now of the role that parents can play in making the mission a success, and therefore the state is building, in fact, different kinds of systems, applications, SMS systems, IVRS systems, in order to reach even the last mile parent, in order to be able to keep an open and consistent communication channel with the parent. So that is something that we're supporting the state to build at the moment. But again, I think the most important task on hand for us to do is really, again, demystify FLN for parents, right? Today, for example, to give you again an analogy, if a child is developmentally behind on, say, a physical development milestone, and a parent is aware of that, right? I mean, if you have a 1-year-old child who's unable to hold her head up, there is something that is off, and therefore you would take her to a pediatrician, and imagine if the pediatrician simply says, does a diagnosis and gives you a report card that says 3 out of 10 on gross motor skills. I mean, what would you as a parent glean out of it? You're not being told which specific motor skill is the issue. You've not been, as a parent, you don't know what kind of therapy or home therapy at home, or activities or exercises at home that you could do as a parent with the child in order to improve her motor skills, and therefore you are lost. And it's the same thing with our children. I mean, if you receive a report card that says your child is 30 out of 100 in Hindi or English, as a parent who may be semi-literate themselves, what are you to make out of it? Okay, my child isn't great with language, but what do I do about it? What kind of routines do I build at home to get the child to be better at it? Does my child know letters, or is it that my child knows letters but cannot read, right? And I think being able to demystify it the way we've demystified physical development for parents. Most parents, most mothers today will know when to raise flags when it comes to a child's physical development. And I think that is what we need to do when it comes to a child's cognitive development with respect to foundational literacy and numeracy. And it needs to be probably gamified. It needs to be, delivered in a way that parents are able to relate to it. And engagement needs also to be incentivized in some way or form. And this communication needs to again go from a trusted adult, an adult that the parent trusts, which is invariably the teacher, and therefore over and above building a community movement around FLN, I do believe that it's important for us to start building systems that will allow the teacher and the parent to be in touch more regularly, something we take for granted in private schools, because you have WhatsApp groups, you have SMSs that parents receive often, you have very elaborate report cards that breaks down a child's skill levels and all of that. I think we need to replicate that for the context, of course, but start involving parents and giving them a chance to be involved, and giving them very specific messages and direction in which they can help children at home. And it's something that we're hoping to build, and it will again be a pivotal part of the FLN mission. So the FLN mission isn't being looked at just as the interventions in classroom, and the community and the parent involvement piece is considered as a critical component, and programs are being built for it as well.
Malia Shaukat, I think your talk has really helped to really demystify, and really give a very holistic view of how we should be looking at foundational literacy and numeracy. And I think all those who are watching us live and who will be watching this video as well, they've really benefited. I think one thing which we would definitely want to take away from this, from your talk, is also that while we work in, there are individuals, educationists, organizations working to work on these different puzzles, which you have kind of brought together under the umbrella of the 6T and FLN. There is a lot of opportunity for learning and sharing and collaboration as well with respect to the different puzzles as well. So truly, thank you for joining us today on this session, and thank you so much for your time and for so patiently kind of helping us understand Madhi's work and philosophy, and also taking some questions and sharing your ideas as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mashood. Absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for having me. I love the questions. Thank you.